There's a moment that comes to all of us. You're sitting across from someone you thought you could trust, sharing something personal, something real. Maybe it's about your health, your finances, your family struggles, or your plans for the future. You open up because you believe in connection, in honesty, in the value of sharing your life with others. And then, weeks or months later, you discover that what you shared in confidence has been twisted, used against you, or spread to people who had no business knowing. The betrayal cuts deep, not just because your privacy was violated, but because you realize that wisdom you thought came naturally with age still had to be learned the hard way. If you're over 60, you've lived through decades of relationships, experiences, and life lessons. You've seen friendships bloom and fade. You've watched people reveal their true characters over time. You've learned that not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, and not everyone who asks about your life genuinely cares about the answer. But here's what many people discover too late. There are certain pieces of information, certain aspects of your life that should never be shared with anyone, no matter how close you think you are, no matter how much you trust them, no matter how innocent the conversation seems. These aren't just casual suggestions or paranoid warnings. These are battle-tested principles that can protect your peace, your security, your dignity, and your autonomy in the years when you need them most. Because the truth is, after 60, you've worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and earned too much wisdom to let careless disclosure undermine everything you've built. Today, we're going to explore 5 critical things you should never share with anyone after 60, and more importantly, why protecting these aspects of your life isn't about being secretive or distrustful. It's about being wise, strategic, and protective of the life you've created. Welcome back to The Heart Code, where we explore the psychology of human behavior, the dynamics of relationships, and the wisdom that comes from truly understanding how people operate in the real world. If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to providing you with practical, research-backed insights that help you navigate life with greater awareness, confidence, and strategic thinking. We don't sugarcoat reality, and we don't pretend that everyone has your best interests at heart. Instead, we give you the tools to see clearly, act wisely, and protect what matters most. Before we dive deep into today's topic, I want to ask you for a few small favors that make a huge difference to this channel. First, if you find value in this video, please take a moment to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that this content matters and helps us reach more people who need to hear this message. Second, leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or even just letting me know you're watching from around the world. Your engagement creates a community of thoughtful, aware individuals who support each other's growth. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, whether it's a friend, family member, or someone in your community who's navigating their 60s or beyond. This information could protect them from serious mistakes. Fourth, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly content on psychology, relationships, and life strategy. And finally, if you really want to support the work we do here, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support allows us to continue creating in-depth, valuable content that goes beyond surface-level advice and gives you real, actionable wisdom you can use in your daily life. Now, let's talk about why discretion becomes not just important, but absolutely critical after the age of 60. You might wonder why this particular age matters. After all, shouldn't we always be careful about what we share? Yes, absolutely. But there's something unique about the period after 60 that makes privacy protection even more crucial. At this stage of life, you're likely dealing with accumulated wealth or assets. You may be facing health challenges that make you vulnerable. You're possibly navigating complex family dynamics involving inheritance and care. You have established patterns and relationships that others may try to exploit, and you're entering a phase where society sometimes wrongly assumes you're less sharp, less capable, or easier to manipulate. The people around you know that you've lived a full life. They know you've accumulated resources, knowledge, experiences, and potentially wealth. Some of them, even people you consider close, may be watching and waiting for opportunities to benefit from what you have. Others may not have malicious intent, but simply lack the wisdom or discretion to keep sensitive information private. And still others may share your information not out of malice or carelessness, but because they genuinely don't understand why certain things should remain confidential. In all these cases, your best protection is silence on specific topics, regardless of who's asking, regardless of how innocent the question seems, regardless of how much pressure you feel to share. Over the next sections, we're going to explore 5 specific categories of information that should remain private after 60. For each one, we'll discuss why it's dangerous to share, what the potential consequences are, how people might try to extract this information from you, and what you should do instead when faced with questions or pressure to disclose. This isn't about becoming paranoid or isolated. It's about being smart, being strategic, and recognizing that the world is full of people who will absolutely use your openness against you if given the chance. Your silence on these matters isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Your boundaries aren't rudeness, they're self-respect. And your privacy isn't secrecy, it's protection. Number 1, your complete financial picture. Let's start with what is perhaps the most critical area to protect: your complete financial situation. Notice I said complete financial picture, not just your wealth, because the danger isn't just in people knowing you're rich. It's in them knowing exactly how much you have, where it is, how it's structured, what your income sources are, what your expenses look like, and what your financial vulnerabilities might be. This information becomes a roadmap that others can use to manipulate, exploit, or take advantage of you in ways you might not even recognize until the damage is done. Here's why your financial privacy matters so much after 60. First, people make assumptions about older adults and money. If you're 60 or beyond, many people automatically assume you have accumulated significant assets. Whether that's true or not, the assumption exists. Some people in your life, including family members, friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances, are absolutely thinking about what you have and what might eventually come to them. They're doing mental calculations, they're making plans, they're positioning themselves. And every piece of financial information you reveal helps them refine those calculations and those plans. When you tell someone exactly how much your home is worth, you're not just sharing a number, you're telling them how much they might inherit, how much equity you might be convinced to tap for their benefit, or how much you might be pressured to give as a gift. When you mention your pension amount, your Social Security check, or your investment returns, you're showing them your monthly cash flow and giving them insight into how much they could reasonably ask you for. When you discuss your savings or retirement accounts, you're revealing your financial cushion and how much pressure you can sustain before you'd have to say no. Every detail you share is a tool someone else can use. Let me give you a real-life example that illustrates this perfectly. Margaret was a 72-year-old widow who had always been open about her finances with her children. She believed that transparency was important and that hiding information was a sign of distrust. So when her daughter asked about her financial situation, Margaret freely shared that she had approximately $800,000 in retirement savings, owned her home outright worth about $400,000, received $3,000 a month in Social Security and pension, and had minimal expenses since the house was paid off. She thought she was being responsible and keeping her daughter informed. What Margaret didn't realize was that her daughter was facing serious financial problems. Her business was failing, her marriage was strained because of money issues, and she was looking for solutions. Armed with complete knowledge of her mother's financial picture, the daughter began a carefully orchestrated campaign. It started with casual comments about how Margaret didn't need such a large house, then progressed to suggestions that Margaret could help the family business with just a small investment. Then evolved into emotional appeals about grandchildren's education needs, then escalated to implications that Margaret was being selfish by sitting on all that money while her family struggled. Over the course of 3 years, Margaret was manipulated into giving her daughter nearly $200,000. Some was presented as loans that would be repaid. Some was framed as investments in the family business. Some was positioned as gifts for the grandchildren's education. But all of it had one thing in common. It was extracted through guilt, emotional manipulation, and leveraging complete knowledge of exactly how much Margaret had and exactly how much she could afford to give without becoming destitute. By the time Margaret realized what had happened, her financial security was significantly compromised. Her relationship with her daughter was damaged, and her retirement plans were in ruins. This story repeats itself thousands of times across the country, with variations in the details, but the same core pattern. Someone over 60 shares their complete financial picture with someone they trust. That person, whether through greed, desperation, or a sense of entitlement, uses that information to extract money, resources, or financial commitments, and the older adult ends up less secure, less independent, and often emotionally devastated by the betrayal. But it's not just family members who pose this risk. Friends can become borrowers who never repay. Neighbors can become referral sources for financial predators. Casual acquaintances can become scammers who know exactly how much to ask for to sound believable. Service providers can adjust their prices based on what they know you can afford. And even romantic interests in later life can be attracted not to you, but to your financial security. Every person who knows your complete financial picture is someone who might use that information in ways you never intended or imagined. The psychology behind this is fascinating and important to understand. When people know you have money, it changes how they perceive you and how they interact with you. Suddenly, your friendship or family connection becomes entangled with financial awareness. They start seeing you not just as a person, but as a resource. They begin to feel entitled to access what you have, especially if they're family. They rationalize that you don't really need everything you have, that you should share with people you care about, that helping them is the right thing to do. And because they know exactly how much you have, they can calibrate their requests to seem reasonable within that context. There's also a phenomenon called financial transparency bias, where people assume that because you shared your financial information voluntarily, you're open to financial requests or assistance. It's as if disclosure equals availability. If you told them you have money, they reason you must be willing to share it. Otherwise, why would you tell them? This is flawed logic, of course, but it's how many people think, often unconsciously. Your openness about finances is interpreted as an invitation to financial engagement. So what should you do instead? How do you handle questions about your finances without alienating people or seeming paranoid? The key is to develop a few standard responses that are polite, firm, and non-specific. When someone asks how much your house is worth, you can say something like, "I'm not sure about the current market value, but I'm comfortable where I am." When someone asks about your retirement savings, you can say, "I'm fortunate to be secure, but I prefer to keep financial details private." When someone asks about your income, you can say, "I have what I need, and I'm grateful for that." Notice that none of these responses are rude or evasive in an obvious way. They acknowledge the question, provide a general sense of well-being, but offer no specific information that could be used against you. If someone pushes harder, asking why you won't share or implying that your privacy means you don't trust them, you can calmly but firmly say, "I've learned that discussing specific financial details rarely leads to anything positive, so I've made it a personal policy to keep that information private. I hope you understand." If they still push, that's actually valuable information for you. It tells you that this person doesn't respect your boundaries and may indeed have ulterior motives. Anyone who truly cares about you will respect your right to financial privacy. There are only a few exceptions to this rule, and they're very specific. Your financial advisor or attorney obviously needs accurate information to serve you properly. Your accountant needs complete financial data to file your taxes correctly. If you're in a committed romantic relationship where finances are shared, some level of transparency is necessary. And if you're engaging in estate planning, your executor or trustee will need information. But notice what all these exceptions have in common. They're professional relationships governed by fiduciary duties and legal obligations, or they're intimate relationships with shared financial lives. They're not casual friends, extended family, neighbors, or acquaintances who have no legitimate need to know your financial details. Even with your adult children, you need to be cautious about complete financial disclosure. Yes, they may eventually inherit what you have, but that doesn't mean they need to know exact amounts right now. You can assure them that you've planned responsibly, that your affairs are in order, that you're working with professionals, and that everything will be clear when the time comes. That's all they need to know. Anything more than that opens the door to entitlement, pressure, family conflict, and manipulation. Remember, your finances are the foundation of your independence and security in later life. They determine where you can live, what care you can afford, what choices you have, and how much autonomy you maintain. Protecting that information is protecting your freedom. Every person who knows your complete financial picture is someone who might try to influence your financial decisions, make claims on your resources, or position themselves for future benefit. Keep your financial situation as private as possible, and you keep your power intact. Number 2, your health details and medical vulnerabilities. The second critical area to protect is your complete health picture, including diagnoses, treatments, medications, prognoses, and especially any conditions that might affect your mental capacity or decision-making ability. This might seem less obviously dangerous than financial information, but it's actually just as critical to protect, and sometimes even more so. Your health information can be weaponized against you in ways that are subtle, legal, and devastating to your autonomy and dignity. Let's start with why people want to know about your health in the first place. On the surface, it seems innocent enough. Friends ask how you're feeling because they care. Family asks about your doctor visits because they're concerned. Neighbors ask about your medication because they're making conversation. And all of this can be genuine, but there's often a secondary motive, conscious or unconscious, that drives these inquiries. People are assessing your competence, your longevity, your vulnerability, and your need for help. They're gathering information that helps them understand their own future position relative to you. Adult children in particular are often very interested in their parents' health details. Some of this is legitimate concern and care, but some of it is also about planning. They want to know how long you're likely to live because it affects their inheritance timeline. They want to know if you're developing cognitive issues because it might give them grounds to seek guardianship or conservatorship. They want to know about your medications because it might explain behaviors they don't like or want to change. They want to know about your diagnoses because it helps them understand what level of care you might need and what it might cost. Every health detail you share gives them more information to factor into their own life planning. Here's a story that illustrates how dangerous health disclosure can be. Robert was a 68-year-old retired engineer who was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. His symptoms were mild, a slight tremor in one hand and occasional stiffness. His neurologist assured him that with medication, he could maintain his quality of life for many years, and that his cognitive function was completely unaffected. Robert was handling the diagnosis well and adjusting his life appropriately. Unfortunately, Robert made the mistake of sharing his diagnosis with his son during a routine phone call. He thought he was just keeping his son informed about his health. He emphasized that the condition was manageable and that he was doing fine. But his son heard Parkinson's disease and immediately began researching the condition online. What he found scared him. Articles about progressive decline, potential dementia, loss of motor control, need for intensive care. The articles didn't match his father's actual situation, which was much milder, but his son didn't understand the nuance. Within weeks, Robert's son began treating him differently. He started questioning Robert's decisions. He suggested that Robert shouldn't be driving anymore, even though Robert's neurologist had cleared him to drive. He implied that Robert shouldn't be managing his own finances. He began making comments in family gatherings about Robert's condition in ways that subtly undermined Robert's authority and competence. He started positioning himself as the concerned son who was trying to protect his declining father. Over the next year, the son gathered medical documentation, consulted with an attorney, and eventually filed for conservatorship, arguing that Robert's Parkinson's disease made him unable to manage his own affairs. Even though Robert's doctors testified that he was completely competent, even though Robert clearly had capacity and was managing his life effectively, the court was swayed by the son's presentation of the disease's potential progression. Robert lost control of his finances. His medical decisions were subject to his son's approval, and his autonomy was stripped away, based primarily on a diagnosis he had voluntarily shared. This example might seem extreme, but it happens more often than you'd think. Health information, especially information about conditions that affect the brain, can be used to question your competence even when your actual functioning is fine. Dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke history, severe depression, anxiety disorders, traumatic brain injuries, any condition that touches on cognitive function can be leveraged by someone who wants to take control of your life or your assets. And you don't even need to have advanced disease. Just the diagnosis is often enough for someone to build a narrative of declining capacity. But it's not just about legal control. Health information can be used in subtler ways. Family members might use your health conditions to justify excluding you from family decisions. They might patronize you, speaking to you like a child because they know you have a diagnosis. They might share your health information with others without your permission, violating your privacy and affecting how people treat you. They might pressure you to move out of your home, give up activities you enjoy, or accept care you don't need, all framed as concern for your health. There's also the issue of how health information affects your relationships and social standing. If people know you have certain conditions, they may treat you differently. They might avoid you, fearing the disease is contagious or uncomfortable about disability. They might gossip about you, turning your health challenges into entertainment for others. They might offer unsolicited medical advice, alternative treatments, or criticism of your doctors. They might use your health condition to dismiss your opinions or minimize your contributions. All of this erodes your dignity and your social position. And here's something many people don't consider. Health information can affect your financial opportunities. If you're still working or consulting in your 60s, revealing certain health conditions could lead to discrimination. If you're applying for life insurance or long-term care insurance, information about your health can affect your rates or your ability to get coverage at all. If you're in a new romantic relationship, premature disclosure of health issues could affect how your partner sees your future together. Health information isn't just personal, it has practical implications across multiple areas of your life. The psychology of health disclosure is complex. When we're facing health challenges, there's often a desire to share with others. It makes us feel less alone. It invites support and empathy. It helps us process what we're experiencing. And for close relationships with people who have proven their trustworthiness, limited sharing might be appropriate, but indiscriminate sharing of health details, especially with people who have their own agendas or who can't be trusted to keep information confidential, is risky at any age, and especially risky after 60. So what should you do when people ask about your health? Develop simple, honest, but non-specific responses. When someone asks how you're feeling, you can say, "I'm doing well, thanks for asking." When they ask about your doctor visits, you can say, "Just routine checkups, everything's under control." When they push for more details, you can say, "I appreciate your concern, but I prefer to keep health matters private." If someone challenges this or implies you're being secretive, you can respond with, "My health is between me and my doctors. I'm sure you understand the importance of medical privacy." There are, of course, situations where health disclosure is necessary or appropriate. Medical professionals directly involved in your care need accurate information. If you're undergoing a procedure or having a health crisis, the people who will be supporting you during that time need to know what's happening. If you're in a relationship where your partner is affected by your health status, they deserve honesty. If you have a trusted friend or family member who has consistently proven they respect your privacy and support you without judgment, you might choose to share with them for emotional support. But even in these cases, you can be selective about what you share and with whom. You don't need to give everyone the same level of detail. Your close friend might need to know you're having surgery, but doesn't need to know every aspect of your diagnosis or prognosis. Your adult children might need to know you're dealing with a health issue, but don't need complete access to your medical records or presence at every doctor's appointment. You can share what's necessary for people to support you appropriately without giving them information they could use to question your competence or control your decisions. It's also wise to be very careful about discussing any cognitive symptoms, even minor ones. If you're having memory issues, even normal age-related forgetfulness, sharing this widely gives people ammunition to question your judgment. If you're experiencing depression or anxiety, revealing this can lead people to dismiss your decisions as symptoms rather than valid choices. If you're taking medications that affect mood or cognition, people might attribute your behavior to drugs rather than your actual thoughts and feelings. Guard information about your mental and cognitive health, especially carefully, sharing only with trusted medical professionals and perhaps one or two deeply trusted individuals in your personal life. Remember, your health information is deeply personal and potentially dangerous in the wrong hands. After 60, when questions of capacity, independence, and autonomy become more prominent, protecting your health privacy protects your right to live your life on your terms. Be polite but firm in maintaining these boundaries. Your health is your business, and you get to decide who knows what about it. Number 3, your family conflicts and intimate relationship problems. The third critical area to protect is your family dynamics, including conflicts with adult children, sibling rivalries, disagreements about inheritance, problems in your current relationship if you have one, or details about past relationships and marriages. This is an area where many people over 60 make the mistake of seeking support or venting to others, not realizing that everything they share can and will be used against them in ways they never anticipated. Here's the fundamental problem with sharing family conflicts. The people you share with almost always have their own agendas, biases, and relationships with the people you're talking about. When you tell your friend about a disagreement with your daughter, your friend now has information that might affect how she treats your daughter in the future. When you tell one adult child about problems with another, you've created a triangle where information can be weaponized. When you discuss your relationship problems with family members, you've invited them into your private partnership in ways that may never be undone. Family conflicts are particularly dangerous to discuss because families are systems where everyone affects everyone else. Information doesn't stay contained. The person you tell today will often tell someone else tomorrow, either deliberately or accidentally. And as information moves through the family system, it gets distorted, amplified, and interpreted in ways you never intended. That conversation you had in confidence becomes family gossip. That moment of frustration you expressed becomes evidence of your difficult nature. That legitimate complaint you voiced becomes a weapon someone uses against you in a future conflict. Let me tell you about Patricia, a 70-year-old woman who learned this lesson painfully. Patricia had 3 adult children and had always been close to them. When her middle daughter made some questionable financial decisions and came to Patricia asking for a substantial loan, Patricia said no. She loved her daughter but had learned over the years that lending money to this particular child never ended well. The daughter was hurt and angry, and the relationship became strained. Patricia was upset about this situation and needed to process her feelings. So she called her youngest daughter and explained what had happened. She talked about her middle daughter's history of financial irresponsibility. She expressed her frustration at being asked for money again. She shared her feelings of guilt about saying no and worry about the damaged relationship. She trusted that this conversation would stay between them and that her youngest daughter would provide support and perspective. What Patricia didn't anticipate was that her youngest daughter had her own complicated feelings about her middle sister. There had always been some rivalry, some comparison, some tension. And now Patricia had given her younger daughter information that confirmed and validated negative feelings she already had. The youngest daughter, whether consciously or unconsciously, began to use this information. She made comments to other family members about the middle daughter's irresponsibility. She positioned herself as the good daughter who didn't burden her mother with financial requests. She shared Patricia's confidence with her own husband, who then formed a negative opinion of the middle daughter. The information spread and mutated. Eventually, the middle daughter learned that Patricia had discussed their private situation with her sister. She felt betrayed, exposed, and humiliated. Her relationship with Patricia became even more strained. Her relationship with her younger sister deteriorated. Family gatherings became tense and uncomfortable, and Patricia, who had only sought support from one trusted daughter, found herself at the center of an expanded family conflict that was much worse than the original problem. Looking back, Patricia realized that keeping the situation private and processing it with a professional therapist instead of involving another family member would have prevented enormous damage to her family relationships. This pattern repeats itself constantly in families where information is shared freely. Adult children discuss one parent with the other, creating triangles. Siblings discuss each other, creating divisions. Grandparents discuss their own children with their adult grandchildren, creating loyalty conflicts. Every time family conflict information is shared within the family system, it adds complexity, creates new problems, and gives people information they can use for their own purposes. But it's not just family members who pose risks when you share family conflicts. Friends who know your family can become gossips, sharing your private information with others in your social circle. Neighbors who hear about your family problems may judge you or see you differently. Even professionals who don't have confidentiality obligations, like clergy or casual counselors, might share what you tell them. And in today's world, you also have to worry about information shared in person being repeated on social media, where it can spread to hundreds or thousands of people in minutes. The psychology of why we share family conflicts is understandable. We're hurt, angry, frustrated, or confused, and we want validation. We want someone to tell us we're right and the other person is wrong. We want sympathy, we want perspective. We want to feel less alone in our struggles. These are all natural human needs, but sharing family conflicts rarely actually meets these needs in healthy ways. Instead, it often amplifies problems, damages relationships, and creates new issues where none existed before. There's also a tendency to believe that venting will make us feel better. Research shows this is often false. While there's a moment of relief when we unload our feelings, venting actually tends to increase anger and negative emotions rather than resolve them. When we tell someone about how wronged we were, they often validate our anger, which reinforces it. When we recount every detail of a conflict, we relive it and intensify it. When we hear ourselves describing someone negatively, we actually become more convinced of that negative view. So not only does sharing family conflicts risk practical problems, it often doesn't even provide the emotional relief we're seeking. And here's something particularly important for people over 60. Sharing family conflicts can affect your inheritance and estate planning in ways you don't intend. When you complain about one child to another, the child you're talking to might reasonably conclude that you favor them and expect that to be reflected in your will. When you discuss family tensions with friends, they might influence your estate planning in ways that reflect their biases rather than your actual wishes. When you reveal family problems to professionals who aren't bound by confidentiality, that information might surface in ways that affect legal proceedings or family mediation down the line. So what should you do when you're dealing with family conflicts? First, recognize that professional support is almost always the better option. A therapist, counselor, or trained mediator has no relationships with your family members, no agenda except your well-being, and a legal or ethical obligation to keep your information confidential. They can provide objective perspective, help you process emotions, and support you in making decisions without creating additional complications. The cost of a few therapy sessions is nothing compared to the damage that sharing family information with the wrong people can cause. If you do feel the need to discuss family matters with someone in your personal life, be extremely selective. Choose someone who doesn't know your family members personally, who has demonstrated wisdom and discretion in the past, and who you truly trust to keep information private. Even then, be careful about the level of detail you share. You can talk about your feelings and experiences without sharing identifying details or specific information that could be repeated. You can seek support without giving a complete play-by-play of family conflicts. When people ask you about your family, develop responses that acknowledge relationships without revealing conflicts. "My kids are all doing well" doesn't require you to mention that one of them isn't speaking to you right now. "I had a nice visit with my daughter" doesn't require you to reveal that you're worried about her marriage. "The family is fine" doesn't require you to detail every tension and problem. You can be honestly positive about your family without being comprehensively truthful about every challenge. If you're in a romantic relationship in your 60s or beyond, be especially careful about discussing relationship problems with family members or friends. Your relationship is between you and your partner. Bringing other people into your conflicts, especially adult children who might have their own feelings about your partner, creates unnecessary complications and pressures. If you're having serious relationship issues that need outside support, again, a professional counselor or therapist is the appropriate resource, not your social circle or family. And here's a crucial boundary. Never, ever discuss intimate details of your romantic or sexual life with family members, friends, or acquaintances. This should be obvious, but it's violated constantly. Your intimate life is private, period, full stop. Sharing details with others not only violates your partner's privacy, but also changes how people see you and your relationship. It invites judgment, unsolicited advice, and gossip. Keep your intimate relationship genuinely intimate, between you and your partner only. Remember that family conflicts and relationship problems are temporary. Most of them eventually resolve or at least diminish in intensity. But information you share while you're in the midst of conflict is permanent. Once you've told someone about a family fight, they will always remember that information, even after you and your family member have reconciled. Once you've painted someone in a negative light to others, those others will carry that negative impression forward, even if your own feelings have changed. Protect your family relationships by keeping family conflicts private, working through them directly with the people involved, and seeking professional support when needed, rather than turning your personal struggles into public knowledge. Number 4. Your future plans, especially regarding estate, inheritance, and end-of-life decisions. The fourth critical area to protect is your future plans, particularly those involving your will, estate planning, inheritance decisions, healthcare directives, living arrangements, and end-of-life wishes. This might be the area where people over 60 make the most mistakes, often out of a well-intentioned desire to be fair, transparent, and communicative with their families. But premature disclosure of these plans creates a minefield of problems that can destroy family relationships, subject you to pressure and manipulation, and result in your plans being derailed before you've even finalized them. The fundamental issue is this: when people know what they're going to receive from you, they begin to feel entitled to it before you've even died. When they know what your plans are, they start trying to influence those plans to their benefit. When they know what someone else is getting, they start making comparisons and building resentments. And when they know details about your healthcare wishes or living arrangements, they start preparing to assert control over those aspects of your life. Every piece of information you share about your future plans gives others a foothold to insert themselves into your decision-making. Let's explore what happens when inheritance plans are disclosed prematurely. Thomas was a 65-year-old widower with 4 adult children. He had always been careful about fairness and wanted his children to know they were all valued equally. So when he updated his will to divide his estate 4 ways, he decided to tell his children about it at a family dinner. He explained that everything would be split equally, that his house would be sold and the proceeds divided, and that he'd set aside some money for each grandchild's education. He thought this transparency would prevent confusion and conflict after his death. What Thomas didn't anticipate was that telling his children about the will would prompt them to start evaluating whether the arrangement was actually fair. One daughter pointed out that she had helped him more over the years than her siblings and implied she deserved more. One son mentioned that he was struggling financially while his siblings were comfortable, suggesting that equal division didn't account for different needs. Another daughter questioned whether her brother, who had once borrowed money from Thomas that was never repaid, should receive an equal share or if that loan should be deducted from his portion. The family dinner that was meant to provide clarity instead sparked arguments and resentments that hadn't existed before. Over the next several years, Thomas's children periodically brought up the will. They made suggestions about changing it. They lobbied for their own interests. They argued with each other about what was fair. What had been a straightforward equal division in Thomas's mind became a constant source of family tension. And as Thomas aged and his health declined, The pressure intensified. His children jockeyed for position, each trying to be the favored child, each worried that Thomas might change the will to benefit someone else. The knowledge of the will's contents, rather than providing peace of mind, had poisoned family relationships and made Thomas's later years much more stressful than they needed to be. Now imagine a different scenario. Margaret was also 65 with 3 adult children. When she updated her estate plan, she told her children only that she had worked with an attorney. Everything was in order. All the paperwork was properly filed, and they would receive instructions from her attorney when the time came. She didn't tell them what was in the will. She didn't explain her reasoning. She simply assured them that she'd made thoughtful decisions and that everything would be clear eventually. Her children asked questions, of course, but Margaret gently but firmly maintained that estate planning details were private and would remain so. Because Margaret's children didn't know what they were getting, they couldn't argue about it. They couldn't try to influence her decisions because they didn't know what those decisions were. They couldn't build resentments against each other based on perceived unfairness because they had no information to base comparisons on. They simply had to trust that their mother had handled things responsibly, and they had to maintain their relationships with her and each other based on genuine connection rather than financial expectation. When Margaret eventually died and the will was read, there were some surprises. She hadn't divided things exactly equally, but had made adjustments based on various factors. But because the decisions were final and clearly documented, and because the children had never been given the opportunity to argue about them in advance, they accepted the arrangements and moved forward. The difference between these two approaches is dramatic. Thomas spent years dealing with family conflict sparked by premature disclosure. Margaret maintained family peace by keeping her plans private. Both cared about their children. Both wanted to be fair. But only Margaret understood that fairness doesn't require advanced disclosure, and that transparency about inheritance can actually create more problems than it solves. This principle extends beyond just the division of assets. It includes any plans that affect your family members or their expectations. If you're planning to leave your house to one child because they've always loved it, don't tell them that in advance. If you're planning to make a large charitable donation that will reduce the estate your children inherit, keep that decision private until it's final. If you're planning to set up trusts with specific conditions for your beneficiaries, don't preview those conditions. If you've decided to disinherit someone for legitimate reasons, certainly don't tell them or their siblings ahead of time. All of these disclosures invite conflict, pressure, and attempts at manipulation. The same principle applies to your end-of-life healthcare wishes. If you've decided that you don't want extreme measures to prolong your life, if you've specified when you want treatment withdrawn, if you've designated someone as your healthcare proxy, these are important decisions that should be documented legally, but they don't need to be widely discussed. When family members know your wishes in advance, they often have strong opinions about whether your choices are right. They might try to convince you to change your mind. They might argue with each other about interpreting your wishes. They might disagree with your designated proxy and position themselves to challenge that person's authority when the time comes. Here's what often happens when end-of-life wishes are shared too widely. Eleanor was 70 years old and had very clear ideas about her end-of-life care. She had watched her own parents die after prolonged, painful medical interventions that she believed had diminished their dignity and prolonged their suffering unnecessarily. So Eleanor created advance directives specifying that if she was terminally ill or permanently unconscious, she wanted only comfort care, no life-prolonging treatments, and a peaceful death. She designated her daughter as her healthcare proxy and discussed her wishes with her daughter in detail. But Eleanor also mentioned her wishes to other family members at various times. She told her son, who had very different views on end-of-life care and believed that life should be preserved as long as medically possible. She mentioned it to her sister, who had religious objections to withdrawing life support. She discussed it with a few close friends who had their own opinions about these difficult decisions. Eleanor thought she was being responsible by making sure people knew her preferences. When Eleanor had a major stroke at 78 and was left in a minimally conscious state, her clear advance directives should have made the medical decisions straightforward. But because so many people knew about her wishes and some of them disagreed, a family war erupted. Her son challenged his sister's role as healthcare proxy, arguing that the directives had been created years earlier, when Eleanor was healthier and might not reflect her current wishes. Eleanor's sister lobbied other family members to push for continued treatment, framing it as a religious and moral obligation. Friends Eleanor had confided in called family members to share their opinions about what Eleanor really wanted. What should have been a clear implementation of Eleanor's documented wishes turned into a months-long family conflict, legal battles, and, ultimately, court intervention, all because Eleanor had shared her private medical wishes too widely. Compare this to Harold, who also had strong end-of-life preferences. Harold created detailed advance directives and designated his wife as his healthcare proxy, with his son as the backup. But Harold told no one except his proxy and his attorney about his specific wishes. When family members asked about his plans, Harold simply said, "I've taken care of everything, legally. My healthcare proxy knows my wishes, and I trust her to make the right decisions when the time comes." When Harold eventually needed end-of-life care, his wife implemented his wishes without interference, without family conflict, and without anyone questioning or challenging the decisions, because the specifics had always been private. Your future plans also include decisions about where you'll live, what kind of care you'll accept, and how you want to spend your remaining years. Maybe you're planning to sell your house and move to a retirement community. Maybe you're thinking about relocating to be near one child rather than another. Maybe you're considering remarrying or moving in with a romantic partner. Maybe you want to travel extensively while you're still healthy. Maybe you plan to refuse assisted living or nursing home placement under any circumstances. All of these are your decisions to make, but they're also decisions that others will have opinions about and might try to influence if they know about them in advance. When adult children know you're planning to sell the family home, they might express hurt feelings or try to convince you to keep it. When they know you're thinking about moving near one sibling, the others might feel rejected or try to compete for your proximity. When they know you're considering remarrying, they might express concerns about a new spouse's access to your assets. When they know you want to spend money on travel, they might pressure you to save it for them instead. Every plan you reveal is an opportunity for others to try to change your mind, guilt you, or manipulate you into making different choices. Here's the truth that many people over 60 need to hear. You don't owe anyone advance notice of your plans. Not your children, not your siblings, not your friends, not your neighbors. Your life is yours to plan as you see fit. Your estate is yours to dispose of as you choose. Your end-of-life wishes are yours to determine. Your future living arrangements are yours to decide. And while it's kind to keep certain people informed where appropriate and necessary, you are under no obligation to provide detailed advance information about personal decisions. So how do you handle questions about your future plans? With polite but firm deflection. When someone asks what's in your will, you can say, "I've worked with an attorney to make sure everything is legally sound, and the details will be available when necessary." When they ask about your end-of-life wishes, you can say, "I've documented everything properly with my healthcare proxy and my attorney." When they ask about your living arrangements or future plans, you can say, I'm still considering my options and will let people know when I've made final decisions. If they push for more information, you can say directly but kindly, I appreciate your interest, but these are personal decisions that I'm keeping private for now. I'm sure you understand. Will some people be offended by your privacy? Possibly. Will some people accuse you of being secretive or distrustful? Maybe. But here's what you need to remember. The people who are most offended by your privacy are often the people who wanted that information for their own purposes. People who genuinely care about you and respect your autonomy will understand that some decisions are private. They'll trust that you're handling your affairs responsibly. They'll wait patiently for information to be revealed in its proper time. The people who demand advance information, who pressure you to share your plans, who make you feel guilty for maintaining privacy, those are exactly the people you should not tell anything to. Your future is yours to plan in private, and your privacy protects your ability to make genuine choices free from pressure, manipulation, or the burden of managing other people's expectations and emotions about your decisions. Keep your plans close to your chest, document everything legally with appropriate professionals, and share information only when absolutely necessary with people who have a legitimate need to know and who have proven their trustworthiness and respect for your boundaries. Number 5. Your regrets, fears, and emotional vulnerabilities. The fifth and perhaps most psychologically complex area to protect is your inner emotional world. Specifically, your regrets about the past, your fears about the future, your insecurities, your emotional wounds, and your personal vulnerabilities. This might seem like the least obviously dangerous information to share. After all, isn't emotional openness healthy? Isn't vulnerability supposed to strengthen relationships? Doesn't sharing our feelings help us connect with others? While there's truth to these ideas, in carefully chosen, deeply trusted relationships, indiscriminate sharing of emotional vulnerabilities after 60 can make you a target for manipulation, diminish how others perceive you, and be used against you in ways that cause profound harm. Let's start with regrets. By the time you're 60, you've lived a full life. You've made thousands of decisions, some excellent, some terrible, most somewhere in between. You've accumulated experiences that you're proud of and experiences you wish you could change. You've hurt people and been hurt. You've missed opportunities and seized others. You've loved and lost. You've succeeded and failed. And with all of that comes regret, natural, normal regret about roads not taken, words not said, choices you wish you'd made differently, relationships you wish you'd handled better. Everyone has regrets. The question is whether you share them, and if so, with whom. When you share your regrets with others, particularly regrets about how you handled relationships or major life decisions, you're giving them information about what you perceive as your failures. This might seem harmless or even healthy, after all. Acknowledging mistakes is part of growth and self-awareness. But here's what you need to understand. People will use your regrets against you. They'll use them to validate their own grievances against you. They'll use them to manipulate you into making amends in ways that benefit them. They'll use them to portray you to others as someone who was a bad parent, spouse, friend, or person. Your regrets, honestly shared, become weapons in their hands. Let me illustrate with Helen's story. Helen was 62 when her adult son confronted her about some difficult periods in his childhood. Helen had been a single mother who worked long hours to support her children. She'd done her best, but there were times when she was physically present but emotionally unavailable because she was exhausted and stressed. Looking back, Helen wished she'd been more present, more patient, more emotionally attuned. She carried some guilt and regret about this. When her son brought up these issues, Helen, wanting to be honest and to validate his feelings, told him that she deeply regretted not being more emotionally available when he was growing up. She said that if she could do things over, she would have made different choices about work and parenting. She thought that acknowledging her regrets would help heal their relationship and show her son that she understood his pain. Instead, her honest admission of regret became ammunition. Her son used Helen's words to build a case that she had been a neglectful mother. He repeated her admission of regret to his siblings, who then also began reinterpreting their childhoods through this lens. He mentioned it to his wife, who developed a negative opinion of Helen based on this one confession. And years later, when there was a family conflict about something completely unrelated, Helen's son brought up her admission again, using her own words to shame her and dismiss her feelings. Helen's regret was real and her acknowledgement of it was honest, but sharing it with someone who wasn't prepared to receive it with compassion and maturity caused tremendous harm. What Helen needed to understand is that you can feel regret privately without confessing it to others, especially to people who were affected by your past choices. You can work through regret with a therapist, in personal reflection, through prayer or spiritual practice if that's part of your life. But sharing it with people who might use it against you is not healing, it's self-destructive. The same principle applies to fears. After 60, you may have legitimate fears about aging, declining health, loss of independence, cognitive decline, outliving your money, dying alone, or facing the end of life. These fears are normal and human, but when you share them with others, you make yourself vulnerable in dangerous ways. People will use your fears to control you. They'll use your fear of cognitive decline to question your decisions. They'll use your fear of dying alone to pressure you into living arrangements you don't want. They'll use your fear of running out of money to make you feel guilty about how you spend your resources. Your fears, once shared, become leverage points for manipulation. Consider Alice, who at 67 confided in her daughter that she was terrified of developing dementia like her mother had. It was a deep, primal fear that Alice carried, and sharing it with her daughter was meant to be a moment of connection and vulnerability. But Alice's daughter, whether intentionally or not, began using this fear against her. When Alice forgot something minor, where she put her keys, the name of a restaurant she wanted to recommend, a detail from a conversation, her daughter would say things like, "Mom, you're forgetting a lot lately. You know you were worried about dementia. Maybe we should have you evaluated." When Alice made a financial decision her daughter disagreed with, her daughter suggested that maybe Alice's judgment was being affected and she should let her daughter help with money matters just to be safe. Alice's honest expression of fear had given her daughter a tool to undermine her confidence and autonomy, all under the guise of concern. Emotional vulnerabilities work the same way. Maybe you feel insecure about your appearance as you age. Maybe you're lonely and crave connection. Maybe you feel your life hasn't lived up to your dreams. Maybe you're afraid you've been a disappointment to people you love. Maybe you struggle with depression or anxiety. These are real, valid feelings that deserve compassion and support. But not everyone in your life is capable of providing that compassion and support without also using the information for their own purposes. When you share your insecurities, people may exploit them. When you admit loneliness, people may manipulate you with promises of companionship that come with strings attached. When you express emotional pain, people may see you as weak rather than human. The psychology of emotional vulnerability is complicated. There's a movement in popular psychology that celebrates vulnerability as the path to authentic connection, and in the right context with the right people, there's truth to that. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability has been transformative for many people. But here's what the popular understanding often misses. Vulnerability is only healthy when it's reciprocal, when it's offered in relationships where there's proven trustworthiness, and when there's mutual respect and care. Indiscriminate vulnerability, sharing your emotional wounds with anyone who will listen, isn't brave or authentic, it's unwise. And after 60, when you may be more vulnerable to exploitation and less able to recover from betrayals, wisdom matters more than ever. There's also a generational factor here. Many people over 60 were raised in a culture that valued stoicism, privacy, and emotional self-reliance. There's wisdom in that tradition that shouldn't be completely discarded in favor of modern pressure to be emotionally open about everything with everyone. That doesn't mean suppressing all feelings or never sharing with anyone. It means being strategic, discerning, and protective of your inner world. It means recognizing that not every relationship can handle your vulnerability. Not everyone has earned access to your emotional reality, and some people will absolutely use your openness against you. So what should you protect? Certainly any expressions of regret about how you treated people, any admissions of past mistakes that could be interpreted as harm you caused, any acknowledgement of failures or shortcomings. Also protect your fears, especially fears about aging, decline, or death that could be used to manipulate you. Protect your insecurities about your worth, your relationships, your accomplishments, or your life choices. Protect any information about mental health struggles, past trauma, or emotional wounds that are still sensitive. Protect expressions of loneliness, sadness, or disappointment that could make you seem desperate or vulnerable to exploitation. Does this mean you can never be emotionally honest with anyone? No, it means you need to be extremely selective about who receives that honesty. A skilled therapist who is bound by confidentiality and trained to handle vulnerable material is an excellent choice. A truly trusted friend or family member who has demonstrated over many years that they respect your privacy, care about your well-being, and don't use information against you might be appropriate for limited sharing. A spiritual advisor or counselor who operates within a confidential pastoral relationship might be suitable. But casual friends, most family members, neighbors, acquaintances, and people who are still proving themselves should not receive access to your emotional vulnerabilities. When someone asks probing questions about your emotional state or your feelings about your life, you can respond with general positivity without deep disclosure. I'm doing well, or I'm in a good place overall, or life has its challenges, but I'm managing fine, are all truthful responses that don't reveal vulnerabilities. If someone pushes for more detail or suggests you're not being open, you can say, I'm a pretty private person about emotional things, but I appreciate you asking. If they push harder, that's information about their boundaries and respect, and you should become even more guarded. There's a particular risk with new people in your life after 60. Maybe you've started a new friendship, joined a new community, or entered a new romantic relationship. There's often pressure to open up and be real to deepen these new connections. But new relationships haven't been tested over time. You don't know if these people will still be in your life in 5 years. You don't know how they handle information they're given. You don't know if they're trustworthy. Moving slowly with emotional disclosure, allowing people to prove themselves over time before you share vulnerabilities, is not being closed or distrustful. It's being wise and protective of yourself. Also, be aware that emotional vulnerability shared online or in public settings can reach far beyond your intended audience. If you're active on social media, in online communities, or in public forums, remember that anything you share there is potentially permanent and available to anyone. A moment of emotional honesty posted online when you're feeling low can be screenshot, shared, and used against you in ways you can't control. Keep your emotional reality private in public spaces, sharing only what you'd be comfortable with the entire world knowing. Here's what you need to remember. Your emotional vulnerabilities are precious and deserving of protection. The people who earn access to them should be very few, very carefully chosen and proven over time to be trustworthy. Most people in your life don't need to know your fears, regrets, or insecurities. They can know you, appreciate you, and maintain good relationships with you without having access to your deepest vulnerabilities. Protecting your emotional inner world isn't being fake or closed off. It's having healthy boundaries and recognizing that not everyone has earned the right to see you in your most vulnerable state. By 60, you've earned the right to emotional privacy. You've lived long enough to know that not everyone who seems friendly is actually trustworthy. Not everyone who asks caring questions actually cares, and not everyone who wants to understand you better has good intentions. Trust your instincts about people. Share vulnerabilities sparingly and strategically, and remember that you can be kind, connected, and engaged with life while still maintaining strong boundaries around your emotional core. We've covered 5 critical areas that require your protection after 60. Your complete financial picture, your health details and medical vulnerabilities, your family conflicts and intimate relationship problems, your future plans regarding estate and end-of-life decisions, and your regrets, fears, and emotional vulnerabilities. Each of these areas represents a potential doorway for others to manipulate, exploit, or undermine you if you're not careful about what you share and with whom. I want to be very clear about what this message is and isn't. This is not about becoming paranoid, isolated, or distrustful of everyone in your life. This is not about assuming everyone has bad intentions or treating all relationships as potential threats. This is not about shutting down emotionally or refusing to connect with people in meaningful ways. What this is about is wisdom, discernment, and strategic protection of the aspects of your life that are most vulnerable to exploitation or misuse. It's about recognizing that some information is simply too dangerous to share widely, regardless of how much you trust someone or how innocent a conversation seems. Think of it like home security. You probably lock your doors at night, not because you assume everyone in your neighborhood is a criminal, but because you recognize that protection is wise even in generally safe environments. You don't leave your valuables sitting on your front porch, not because you hate your neighbors, but because you understand that visible temptation creates opportunities for theft, even among people who might not otherwise steal. You protect your home because it's your sanctuary, your safety, your foundation. The 5 areas we've discussed today are the same thing. They're the foundation of your security, autonomy, and peace in the years after 60, and they deserve protection regardless of how safe your environment seems. The reality is that you've worked your entire life to build the foundation you're standing on now. You've accumulated resources, whether financial or emotional or social. You've earned your independence and your right to make your own decisions. You've survived challenges and overcome obstacles. You've learned hard lessons and gained valuable wisdom. And now, at a stage when you should be enjoying the fruits of your life's work, you're also at a stage when others may see you as vulnerable, exploitable, or controllable. Your protection against that isn't paranoia. It's intelligent boundary setting and information control. There's a profound difference between privacy and secrecy. Secrecy is hiding information because you're doing something wrong or shameful. Privacy is protecting information because it's personal, sensitive, and valuable. What we've discussed today is privacy, not secrecy. You're not hiding wrongdoing when you decline to share your financial details. You're protecting your security. You're not being deceptive when you keep your health information private. You're maintaining your dignity and autonomy. You're not being dishonest when you don't discuss family conflicts with outsiders. You're protecting relationships and respecting boundaries. You're not being fake when you keep your estate plans confidential. You're preventing manipulation and family strife. And you're not being closed off when you guard your emotional vulnerabilities. You're being wise about who has earned access to your inner world. Some of you watching this might be thinking, but I've already shared all of this information with people in my life. Is it too late? It's never too late to establish better boundaries. If you've been overly open in the past, you can simply begin being more private going forward. You don't need to announce a change or explain yourself. Just start declining to answer invasive questions. Start responding with pleasant but non-specific answers. Start redirecting conversations away from sensitive topics. People may notice the change, but most won't comment on it, and those who do comment have just identified themselves as people who feel entitled to information about you, which tells you they're exactly the people you should not share with. If you've already shared information that's being used against you, consider whether you can take steps to limit the damage. If you've shared financial information that's leading to requests for money, you can say your financial situation has changed and you're no longer in a position to help. If you've shared health information that's being used to question your competence, you can provide updated medical evaluations that confirm your capacity. If you've shared estate plans that have created family conflict, you can inform everyone that you're reviewing your plans and they should consider any previous information outdated. You can't unring the bell completely, but you can sometimes limit the ongoing impact of past over-disclosure. For those of you who are earlier in life, perhaps in your 40s or 50s watching this video, I hope this serves as a preview of what's coming and helps you start establishing these boundaries now before you reach the age when they become even more critical. The patterns of openness or privacy you establish in middle age will carry forward into later life. If you're already practicing strategic privacy about finances, health, plans, and vulnerabilities, you'll have strong boundaries in place when you need them most. If you're currently oversharing everything with everyone, start pulling back now, gradually establishing healthier patterns of disclosure that will protect you as you age. I also want to address adult children who might be watching this. If you recognize that you've been pushing your aging parents for information in these 5 areas, I encourage you to examine your motives. Are you asking because you genuinely need the information to support your parents appropriately? Or are you asking because you're curious, because you want to plan your own life based on their resources, because you're worried about inheritance, or because you feel entitled to know? If your motives are anything other than genuine, immediate need to know for supportive purposes, back off. Respect your parents' privacy. Trust that they're handling their affairs appropriately, and understand that your parents maintaining boundaries with you isn't a rejection of you. It's them being wise and protective of themselves, which they have every right to be. The 5 areas we've discussed today represent the pillars of your autonomy and security after 60. Your financial picture determines your independence and options. Your health information affects how others perceive your capacity and competence. Your family dynamics influence your relationships and peace. Your future plans determine how you'll live and eventually die on your own terms. And your emotional vulnerabilities make up your psychological core that deserves protection. Guard these 5 areas carefully. Share information only when absolutely necessary, with carefully chosen, proven, trustworthy individuals, and don't let social pressure, guilt, or the desire for connection push you into disclosure that could harm you. Remember these key principles. Privacy is protection, not paranoia. Boundaries are wisdom, not coldness. Discretion is strength, not weakness. Silence on sensitive topics is strategic, not dishonest. And maintaining information control is your right, not something you need to justify or apologize for. You've earned the privilege of managing your own information, making your own decisions, and living your life on your own terms. Don't give that privilege away by sharing too much with people who haven't earned your complete trust. Before we close, I want to ask you again to support this channel in the ways that matter most. If you found this video valuable, hit that like button right now. Your like tells YouTube that this content is worth recommending to others who need to hear this message. Take a moment to leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or even just a simple acknowledgement that you're watching. Comments create engagement that helps the algorithm share this video more widely, and they also create a community of aware, thoughtful individuals who can learn from each other's perspectives. Share this video with anyone in your life who's over 60 or approaching that age. Send it to your parents, your older relatives, your friends, anyone who could benefit from this information. Knowledge is power, and sharing this knowledge is an act of care. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly content on psychology, relationships, and life strategy. We're building a community of people who value truth, wisdom, and practical strategies for navigating life with awareness and intelligence. And finally, if you really appreciate the depth and quality of this content, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support directly enables us to continue creating comprehensive, well-researched, valuable content that goes far beyond the surface-level advice you'll find elsewhere. Every super thanks contribution makes a real difference in our ability to serve you with the highest quality content possible. Your later years should be a time of peace, enjoyment of what you've built, and living life on your own terms. Protecting the 5 critical areas we've discussed today: finances, health, family dynamics, future plans, and emotional vulnerabilities, gives you the best chance of achieving that goal. You've spent decades building your life. Don't let careless disclosure tear it down now. Be wise, be strategic, be protective of what matters. Guard your information like you'd guard your physical safety, because in many ways, information control is safety. The people who genuinely care about you will respect your boundaries. The people who don't respect your boundaries have just revealed their true nature, and that's valuable information for you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community, and thank you for taking your privacy and security seriously enough to watch this entire video. I know it was long, but these topics deserve comprehensive treatment, and I believe you deserve content that respects your intelligence and gives you real, actionable wisdom rather than quick tips that don't actually help. Until next time, protect yourself, trust your instincts, maintain your boundaries, and remember that the wisest thing you can often do is simply keep your own counsel. Take care of yourself out there, and I'll see you in the next video.